And what we're going to do now is meditate. This is a meditation group, so we're going to sit for about 15 minutes. And what we're going to do is our usual kind of body scan, mindfulness of breathing, and then noticing what parts come up in the mind. This is really good practice to do to start having some self-reflection and noticing these parts as they're coming up in real time. A really important part of insight meditation is noticing things in the moment while they're happening and how they present. Is it thinking? Is it a sensation? How does this part of me coming up? What is it trying to do? What is it seeking? And then, of course, returning. Not getting too analytical, but just being kind of curious is the attitude we're going to be cultivating. So yeah, finding any way to sit that feels good for you, comfortable, upright. And if you'd like to close your eyes, you can certainly close your eyes, or you can just rest your gaze at the floor we have in front of us. And let's just start with a few longer, slower, deeper breaths, just at your own speed, whatever it is that your body needs right now. And then as you feel ready, just letting go of any control over the breath and letting the body breathe naturally. And it's trusting in the wisdom of this body. Noticing this body has been breathing from the moment you were born. And will be breathing throughout the entirety of this life. So tuning in to that through line of life, of vitality. And noticing the kind of uplifting quality of the in-breath and the release of the out-breath. And just allowing the thinking mind to kind of fall to the background for now. And bringing the body and the breath to the foreground of your attention. And as we settle in, also starting to soften the body with each out-breath. So we're relaxing around the upright spine, if upright is possible for you. And then softening, starting at the scalp, the muscles of the forehead, the eyes, just noticing what's happening with the eyes. Can they relax where they are? And the same thing with the muscles of the brain and the thinking mind. Softening with each out-breath. And similarly in the jaw, the tongue, noticing any holding and letting go. Staying with the rhythm of the breath as we scan down through the shoulder blades. Seeing if it's possible for the shoulder blades to come together a little bit. And noticing how that can open up the chest to breathe a little bit easier. And relax the arms and the hands and the fingers. And scanning through the heart and the stomach and the chest. So many of the emotions felt on a day-to-day basis come through this area of the heart or the stomach or the belly. So just noticing what's happening with the muscles there and softening what you can soften. Particularly the lower belly sometimes just wants to hold on for dear life. So kind of inviting in a relaxation there. And noticing how breathing down through the lower belly can help the body to connect energetically down through the legs. Almost visualizing as we scan down through the contact with the chair, your sit bones, that this lower half of the body is receiving each in-breath. Breathing into the upper legs, the thighs. The knees. And then scanning down through the muscles of the calves and the shins. And through the feet and toes. What is it like to be aware of the body from the ground up? Can even visualize, if it feels supportive, that with each out-breath, any residual mental or physical stress is just melting down through the body, through the feet, into the floor. Leaving the body soft and open, and the mind alert and relaxed. And bringing the awareness to the whole body. And really settling into that rhythm of the breath. Maybe noticing where's the sensation of breathing most predominant. Maybe there's a location, or maybe it's just kind of the wide sense of the body breathing. And tuning into the wind element, the exchange of air from the outside to the inside, and how that taps into the energetic flow of the body. Noticing what it's like to be still and quiet in the middle of a bustling city. Just allowing the sounds and the atmosphere to kind of just flow right through the mind, like an open door. Really tuning into the body, the breath, the heart, and your own experience. As the mind starts to settle, the encouragement is to start to invite some curiosity as to what's arising. And that could be just a feeling, sensations in the body. We're not trying to fabricate any experience. Just noticing. If the mind's feeling dull, just noticing dullness or sleepiness. If the mind's feeling agitated, noticing the agitation. And allowing. At the heart of this practice, we're not trying to stop the mind from thinking or to stop the heart from feeling, but we're just allowing all of experience just to arise and pass, to go its natural way. And if the mind has a persistent thread it keeps following, or maybe threads that it's following, just kind of noticing, where it's going. How it feels, how it shows up. Inviting curiosity rather than aversion and trying to force the mind to be still and quiet. The poet Rumi says, like a guest house, this mind. Whatever comes up, it's okay. Notice if there's any parts of the mind trying to manage or fix or control what's happening. Just noticing, okay, manager, I see you. Appreciate what you're trying to do, trying to help, but right now, it's okay. Inviting these parts to rest. Spend another minute or two just in silence here, just practicing whatever way feels good for you. And as we come to a close, just sharing any benefit that comes from this practice. May it be for the welfare and the benefit of ourselves, for the sanity and well-being of our community, and for all beings who may be suffering in this moment. May all beings be free. So thank you for your practice, for being here, for showing up. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about what's often called parts. It's kind of become a popular term in psychology in recent years. And we're calling this series Multiplicity Within. And the idea is recognizing that within human experience, there are many parts, multiple parts, which are trying in various ways to help or be a benefit. And so we can call these parts or whatever we want to call them. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is just human experience. I'm going to pass this book around right now. This was written by a friend of Sarai's, Ralph De La Rosa. It's called Outshining Trauma. And he talks about the intersection of internal family systems, which is a psychological theory, and Buddhist meditation. And so I get the sense that, we can use these language like trauma or protectors, but really what we're talking about is in different moments, there's different emotions arising. There's different parts of us coming up. And I get the sense that 2,500 years ago, Buddhist teachings were pointing to something very similar. That there's a sense of fragmentation that can arise, a sense of separateness that can arise when there's strong feelings like fear or anger. There's a sense of being separate either from ourselves or from those around us. And so strong at times that it can feel broken or separated. where just a moment ago I was fine, and then now I'm feeling totally activated. Where did this come from? How is this happening, right? And some of these parts tend to be cyclical or repeated. And in Buddhism, they talk about this idea of samsara, the cyclical nature of suffering. And so there might be some parts that you're familiar with that have come up for as long as you can remember. Very repetitive. And so the Buddhist approach says that the way to freedom and to wholeness is not getting rid of these parts, but meeting every experience with calm, with curiosity, with clarity, and with compassion. A lot of C words that we'll get to later. And to be able to liberate this heart from the sense of fragmentation or feeling broken or separate. And so it's understandable to be averse to anxiety or to fear, or to anger, to not want it to be there. But it's actually this pushing away of experiences that is the mechanism that causes a lot of suffering, a lot of stress in this life. And there's a Buddhist term for thirst or craving, which is tanha. And then there's the craving for non-existence, to not feel something. It's called vibhava tanha, wanting to push away or not wanting to feel something. And so this is what we're going to explore over the next 5 weeks or so. How Buddhist wisdom and teachings can help us understand how to work with all these various parts that we may have. How to meet them with skill, compassion, understanding, lead to insight. And we're going to explore kind of the psychological perspective and a lot that's been shared in recent years from approaches like internal family systems and how they overlap and sometimes don't overlap with Buddhist teachings. Kind of just going to explore this openly. And then, of course, share practices to help liberate the heart from the sense of fragmentation or feeling separated or broken. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about internal family systems. Some of you may be familiar with this approach, some of you less, so I'm just going to do a really basic intro. And it was started by a guy named Richard Schwartz, and he worked with families at the beginning of his career as a psychologist, I believe. And then made a switch at a certain part from working with families to working with individuals. And he realized that in working with families, one thing that needs to happen is that all of the parts of the family need to be recognized for the family to feel whole. It's a big part of family work. And so when he started to work with individuals, he was working with people who had trauma. I was noticing that there's actually a very similar thing happening within the individual. The longer you get to know someone, the longer you get to know all these different parts that are coming up with them. And how some of these parts have needs and need to feel met. And that to make the person feel whole, there's a recognizing of all these different parts. So some of the parts that he recognized are the ones that carry pain or vulnerability, which he called exiles. And these are often parts that are like inner child or parts that carry trauma, wounded parts. And then there's some parts that are protective, kind of manager parts. And often what they're trying to do is to protect those wounded parts from being exposed or felt. And then there's parts that he described as firefighters, which are like a last resort. And this is when all else fails. Sometimes people turn to things like addiction or self-harm because the pain is just too great. And there's no way out, or seemingly no way out. And then one thing that's interesting from his approach is he identified what he called a core self. Basically said that there is also this inherent part of every human being that is steady and compassionate and that actually can't be harmed. And so in the work of IFS, what's being done is helping people uncover what he saw to be their authentic or their core self. So we're not going to dive too deep into that, but we'll be touching on it a little bit over these next few weeks. And so in Buddhist psychology, the self is seen to be dynamic. It's made up of processes like the body, feelings, perceptions, mental patterns. The Buddha often broke things down like that. Instead of identifying with things as this is me, just noticing this is just a feeling that's arising and passing, right? This is just the body. This is the body's nature to feel pain, things like that. This is what he called the 5 khandhas that made up a self, which I think means something like heaps or piles. So form, feeling, perception, volition, and sense consciousness. And he said this is actually what the self is. It's just this conglomeration of these different parts, or a constellation. So a little bit different than Richard Schwartz's perspective, but similar in some ways as well. And so the Buddha didn't teach that there was no self, but he taught that no individual part is you ultimately. So the Buddha tended to avoid making kind of metaphysical statements about the nature of reality, and instead pointed to practices to help liberate the heart and mind. So in looking at thoughts, for example, that are shifting and changing, or feelings which are constantly shifting and changing, he would say to the monks, can this be you? This thing that's continually changing. And it's a way to get the mind to disidentify and to refrain from attaching or grasping or to identifying with some of these specific parts. And of course, it's okay to have an identity, but the Buddha taught to simply recognize how identifying with phenomena as me leads to pain, as suffering, things that will inevitably change. And on the other hand, relating to experience with compassion, with calmness and non-grasping leads to greater freedom. And there's also this concept called Buddha nature in a lot of Buddhist traditions, and this is kind of remarkably similar to what IFS calls the self. And this is in some Buddhist traditions where they say that the essence of human experience, often connected to the heart or awareness, is kind of like indestructible. It's innately free, it's innately compassionate, and so the nature or the direction of practice isn't to gain anything, but to just uncover this beautiful thing that's already there. I don't know about you, but that always really resonated with me and really helped me change the direction of practice, that I'm not trying to gain something, but rather uncover something that's already here. So both internal family systems and Buddhist philosophy recognize that there's this multiplicity within the human experience. And multiplicity doesn't mean that we're broken, it just means that we're human, yeah? This is kind of part of just being human. You don't get to just be one thing. And both of these kind of practices or traditions encourage us to turn towards these parts with curiosity, compassion, rather than judgment. So as I said earlier, the internal family systems model, they talk about this capital S self, and he uses 8 C's. I don't know why he chose all 8 C words. He probably just saw a pattern and was like, all right, let's just keep going with this. It'll be easy to remember. The capital S self is calmness, clarity, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. So he's saying the encouragement in that modality is to cultivate those skills and that being the authentic self. And it doesn't mean these other parts are not a part of who you are, but it is a way of incorporating them back in. When you're meeting them with curiosity rather than aversion or fear, it's easier for those parts to feel seen. And then similarly in Buddhist teachings, they have the 7 awakening factors. So mindfulness, investigation, very similar to curiosity, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. So similarly taught that there are these qualities that can be cultivated that can really help as means of meeting experience. And so I know this can all sound very philosophical, so I always like to try to bring it back to like personal experience a little bit. And there's a couple parts that were coming to mind of myself as I was working on this. And the first one is kind of it goes back so far I don't remember when it started, but I guess you could say a social anxiety, a fear of being seen. And it almost has like a freeze response to it, or a fight or flight response in certain social interactions, or sometimes even in public speaking for me. Heart gets elevated and the body starts to almost like shut down in a way. And it's so familiar, and I've experienced it so many times that it just feels so embedded in, in who I am. But as a younger person, I was terrified of it and never wanted to be seen as vulnerable or, someone who is just weird, I guess, as a teenager or a young adult. And so I spent so much time trying to mask that part through repressing it, avoiding situations, or using substances so I wouldn't feel it. I feel like for myself, so much of my drinking and drug use was really just trying to escape this uncomfortable part of me. So two parts, right? There's a wounded, scared kind of fight or flight response. And then there's this other part that's trying to manage it on top of it. Is this starting to make sense or resonate? I'm sure everyone has their own versions of this. And so ironically, what happens is, of course, this manager part, which is trying to help, it's not helping through the drug use, through the alcohol, through trying to repress something that was just happening in the body that I really had absolutely no control over. And so what happens is it turns into this vicious cycle. The dysregulation gets worse, the manager tries harder to cover it up, and the whole thing starts to spiral out into addiction over time. So fast forward, and I come to this practice about 9 years ago, come to a meditation center. And I'm told that I'm supposed to open to this part rather than running away from it. And I remember being like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. I don't even know how to do that or what that means, honestly. It was so embedded, it was so natural to push something away that I really didn't know how to do that. And then also, I was like, I don't think you understand what I'm trying to do. I came here to get rid of this thing, And now you're telling me to meet this. I remember that, like, meet it with curiosity, and just being like, what the fuck does that mean? I really not having an understanding. But that's the thing with meditation, familiarity and time. It's like, oh, day after day after day after day of not avoiding what I was feeling and sitting with it and getting to know it and becoming more familiar. Over time, it started to untangle that whole mess of those two parts. The manager part, of course, it's still there and it comes up, and I'm like, okay, I've changed my relationship to it, and I don't let it run the show the way it used to. And I guess from the internal family systems model, coming back to working from a capital S self, for the Buddhist perspective, I don't know what they would call that, because there's not a self at the heart of experience, but releasing the heart from some of those patterns. So changing the relationship to experience. And one of the ways that I learned to do that, which we'll get more into, I think Olivia is going to share next week on how to work with these parts with compassion. But sitting on a compassion retreat where the encouragement was to use phrases like, I see you, I'm here for you, to others and to our own experience. And I remember, doing that for days and days and days on end, and really starting to feel, recognizing this protector, manager part, and then really starting to feel into what's underneath that. The fear, the dysregulation that was there, and meeting that finally in a deep way. And I could feel like, oh, there's some actual catharsis here. There's some actual release. If I just sit here for long enough, the body kind of knows how to heal and to re-regulate. And so that's a big part of, I feel like, all of these, practices for working with these parts. It's patience, And it's really compassion, being here, showing up for those parts from the heart. And that creates an environment, doesn't force anything to happen, but creates an environment where this alchemy of the heart can take place. And so, as I said earlier, it doesn't mean these parts disappear, but the relationship to them can evolve deeply. These phrases, I see you, I feel you, I'm here for you, have become so embedded for me now over time. And I notice throughout the week when my mind starts to spinning into that kind of anxiety-ridden fear of what could go wrong, that I'm able to now show up for that part as it's arising. Like, okay, I see you. I know what you're trying to do. I appreciate you, but come on back, because that's not helping at all. And over time, what I found is that parts of me that have felt very excluded in the right, putting myself in the right spiritual place and in the right community, I've realized that I can, and all of those parts can be accepted and included into the whole. So this is kind of just an introduction on, this idea of parts that we'll explore a little more deeply. The psychological perspective, the internal family systems approach, as well as some of the Buddhist perspective. And I think there's quite a bit of an overlap there, and we're really going to try to lean into that, not pretending like these are the same things, but noticing that these are traditions that are thousands of years apart and that are offering a lot of similar approaches to working with the mind and working with the emotions. And I always find that there must be some wisdom in that overlap, surely. And so while a lot of these parts can feel separate or like the enemy, they're here for a reason. And that's another thing that we're going to be exploring. So often what's needed is just to be curious. Why is this part here? What is it trying to do? It's here for a reason. Even the fight, flight, freeze response in the body, it's there for a reason. It's trying to protect. It doesn't always feel like that. It feels terrifying sometimes or really ungrounding, but it's trying to help. So that'll be a big part of what we're trying to explore as well, trying to gain insight into what these parts are doing and what they need. And the encouragement often, just as a starting point, is relating to these parts similarly to how you may relate to a struggling child. What's wrong? What are you trying to tell me? And what do you need? And if we could take that same perspective to our own experience, this is where some of that integration, those parts can start to feel like they're included in the whole. And I wanted to end with a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, which seems to be happening a lot recently, but he's got so many good ones. This one's about anger. It says, when we embrace our anger with the energy of mindfulness, we are not suppressing it, nor are we letting it explode. We are taking good care of our anger, just as we would take care of a crying child.